9 Golden Age stars critics said were terrible actors were nevertheless the faces that defined an era, beautiful, glamorous, larger than life, and according to many reviewers, some of the worst performers ever to cash a Hollywood paycheck. The dirty secret of the studio system, as revealed by a former MGM publicity director who worked through the 1950s, was not finding talent, but hiding the lack of it behind beautiful faces and expensive productions. This was Hollywood's most carefully guarded scandal. The stars who couldn't act, not people with occasional bad performances or early career missteps, but entire careers built on everything except acting ability. These were stars savaged by critics, yet pushed relentlessly by studios that knew exactly what they were selling, and it wasn't talent. One Academy Award-winning filmmaker confessed about a blonde bombshell on this list that his job wasn't directing her. It was pointing her at the camera and praying she didn't mangle the dialogue too badly. What makes this story fascinating is that these terrible performers were not failures. They were A-list celebrities earning fortunes, dating fellow stars, appearing on magazine covers worldwide, and audiences kept buying tickets despite critics complaining that they delivered lines with the emotional depth of someone reading a grocery list. The answer reveals one of the most brilliant con jobs in entertainment history, and why sometimes being a great actor was the least important qualification for becoming a Hollywood legend, beginning with the woman whose physical measurements were printed in larger type than her name on movie posters, and whose acting was described as a crime against dialogue, Jayne Mansfield. Jayne Mansfield burst onto the scene in January 1957 amid flashbulbs outside Grauman's Chinese Theater, stepping from her pink Cadillac in a dress so tight it looked painted onto her famous figure, sending crowds into a frenzy while studio executives smiled, unconcerned that the New York Times had just called her performance an embarrassment to the craft of acting. A former 20th Century Fox publicist later admitted Jayne was their nuclear option, unleashed in a dress 2 sizes too small whenever publicity was needed, so nobody remembered she couldn't act. Critics were merciless, with The Hollywood Reporter saying she confused volume with emotion, giggling with comedy and exposure with acting, and Variety comparing her performance in The Girl Can't Help It to watching someone read phonetically in a language they didn't understand. What set Mansfield apart was her self-awareness. She knew exactly what she was selling, and it wasn't Shakespeare. During one grueling shoot, after repeated demands for more emotion, she famously pointed to her assets and quipped that if they wanted emotion, they wouldn't have hired those. Directors like Frank Tashlin devised techniques to work around her limitations, literally performing scenes for her to imitate line by line, gesture by gesture, later cutting her footage together with reaction shots to create the illusion of performance. Her career was built on one of the greatest publicity machines Hollywood ever created, choreographed wardrobe malfunctions, a pink mansion with a heart-shaped pool, and relentless headlines. At her peak, she earned over $150,000 per film, and though dismissed by George Cukor as a walking gimmick, her tragic death at 34 transformed her into legend without ever altering the critical assessment of her acting, proving she succeeded not despite her limitations, but by making acting ability irrelevant. If Mansfield represented the female side of Hollywood's beauty over talent equation, Tab Hunter showed men could play the same game with even less ability. Directors reportedly told him, "Don't act, just react." Advice suited to a man with the looks Warner Brothers hoped would rival James Dean and Marlon Brando, but with what one director described as the emotional range of a coffee table. Critics were brutal. Bosley Crowther called him a handsome mannequin. Time magazine said he didn't deliver lines, he survived them. Yet teenage girls turned him into one of the biggest heartthrobs of the 1950s. Studio insiders joked that each facial expression he could manage was worth $500,000, and with 3 expressions he was very valuable. His limitations became glaring in Damn Yankees, where singing, dancing, and emotional transformation exposed every weakness, prompting choreographer Bob Fosse to remark he could teach anyone to dance, but not to have a pulse. Still, his fame continued, with a #1 hit song and endless fan mail, creating a psychological toll Hunter later described as schizophrenic. Decades later, he revealed he had been hiding his sexuality, acting not only on screen but every moment of his life, a burden that may explain why critics sense something fundamentally inauthentic in his performances. Where Hunter's struggles had context, Mamie Van Doren represented the studio system at its most cynical. Created as Universal's answer to Marilyn Monroe and Jane Mansfield, she was criticized not merely as a bad actress, but as evidence of everything wrong with Hollywood. Reviews mocked her mercilessly, with one critic likening her to stale water compared to champagne and beer. There was no pretense of acting ability, only the calculation that audiences would pay to see another blonde bombshell. Executives openly admitted they didn't need her to act, just to stand in approved angles. Directors used rapid cuts and constant movement to disguise her limitations, while critics described her performances as stiff, awkward, and laughable. Despite this, her films were profitable enough to keep her employed, until even forgiving audiences began rejecting the artificiality. John Derek followed, a man chosen for his chiseled face and pushed relentlessly as a leading man despite possessing one expression for every emotion. Critics mocked his intense stare and emotional emptiness, and his scenes opposite actors like Humphrey Bogart only highlighted his limitations. Yet after his acting career faded, Derek reinvented himself as a director and photographer, famously showcasing the beauty of his wives, especially Bo Derek, building a second career around the power of image rather than emotion, completing a strange full circle from being exploited for his looks to exploiting the looks of others. Tony Curtis differed from the rest, because his problem was miscasting rather than inability. His heavy Bronx accent turned historical epics into unintentional comedy, earning savage reviews and legendary ridicule. Yet unlike many pretty boys, Curtis worked relentlessly to improve. Through coaching, study, and self-awareness, he transformed his career, delivering acclaimed performances in Sweet Smell of Success and The Defiant Ones, earning an Oscar nomination and proving that determination could overcome a disastrous start, even if critics never fully forgot his early failures. Hedy Lamarr presented one of Hollywood's greatest ironies, promoted as the most beautiful woman in the world while criticized as cold and mechanical on screen. Unknown to most, she was a genuine scientific genius, co-inventing technology foundational to modern wireless communication. Acting to her was a precise equation, technically perfect but emotionally empty, leading MGM to minimize her dialogue and maximize her visual presence.